Good afternoon and welcome. We're glad to have you with us today for the fourth installment in Greater Lafayette Commerce's popular quarterly development series. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge our sponsors. A special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Duke Energy, and thank you to our series sponsors, CenterPoint Energy, Centier Bank, City Bus, DeFau Automotive, Franciscan Health, Freitag Weinhardt, GeneX Solar, Goot Wine Law, Henriot Group, Horizon Bank, Huth Thompson, IU Health Arnett, Ivy Tech Community College, Keller Williams Realty, Kettle Hut Construction, Kirby Risk, McGohan Brabender, Old National Bank, Purdue Federal Credit Union, Purdue University, Security Federal Savings Bank, Star Associates, T-Bird Design Services, Tempest Homes, Tippecanoe Building and Construction Trades Council, Ton and Blank Construction, Wabash, and Wintech powered by Tipmont. Let's give our sponsors a round of applause.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Walker. I'm the President and CEO of Greater Lafayette Commerce. I want to thank all of you for coming out for our last quarterly development series of the year. This is always one that's highly expected, especially after an election like we just had. So we're going to be hearing about what the economy is going to be doing in 2025. So we're excited to be here with you today at the North End Community Center and appreciate use of this space. Let's give a round of applause for North End. I'd like to recognize our elected officials with us here today from the City of Lafayette. On the City Council, we have Steve Snyder. We also have our police chief, Scott Cowboy. From Tippecanoe County, we have two of our commissioners, Tracy Brown is here. And David Byers. We also have Sheriff Bob Goldsmith. The County Council, we have a newly elected council member, soon to be on the council, Ben Carson. From the Shadeland Town Board, we have Vice President Tim Ballansever. From the Tippecanoe Township, we have Trustee Bill Jones. In Senator Braun's office, we have Mark Dowd. I wanted to say something more about Senator Braun, but I kind of paused there. So Mark Dowd is Senator Braun's office. Sorry about that. So it's my pleasure now to introduce Tim Newton, the Director of External Relations and Communications for the Daniel School of Business. He is also serves as the radio play-by-play voice of the Boilermaker football and women's basketball. Tim is our MC for the panel today. I'll turn it over to Tim.
Thank you, Scott. If Scott did not call your name, if you'd like to stand up and wave, feel free to do so right now. It's always a highlight for us to come and bring a couple of people from the Daniel School of Business, particularly in our economics department. We feel like we have some of the best researchers and teachers in the world right here across the river, and glad to show them off for you. And starting off on that is Kevin Mumford. Kevin's a professor of economics in the Daniel School of Business. He's the co-executive director of the Purdue University Research Center in Economics, or PERS. His research focuses on the evaluation of public policy in areas such as education, taxation, labor market regulation, and personal finance, as well as the role of human capital in measuring national wealth. He's a regular at this event, always well received. Would you please welcome Kevin Mumford.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here with you today. Let me start off like I have for the last several years in this by showing you the number of deaths in the entire United States. This is just the count. So it's month by month the number of deaths in the United States. And what you'll notice is that there's a lot of seasonality. the peaks, over and over again, each peak is the month of January. And then you'll see there's a decline in February and an increase in March. And the reason there's a decline in February is because there's fewer days in February than there are in January and March. And that's all. The idea is that the winter is more likely to have deaths. Then in the summer, there are fewer deaths in the United States. And then back up again for the winter. And you see that pattern happening right up until the pandemic. And the pandemic happens, and then the pattern just completely deviates. Well, we get much higher death counts. And then you can also see that there seems to be a period where the pandemic is just over, and we're right back to that pattern of up and down. The seasonality has returned, and it's looking very stable, and it's looking very constant. And so in terms of this type of pandemic worry, all the future pictures, I put this pink area in for this is when the deaths were high, this is when the deaths were elevated. GDP looks great. GDP is the measure of all of the economic output, or another way to think of it is it's the measure of all of the consumption happening in the country. It's the measure of total income for the nation. Compared to potential GDP, current GDP is higher than we would even say our economy running at full capacity is at. That's how good the economy is today. And potential GDP, the dashed red line, that's determined by if all the factors are being used at full capacity. And the most important of those factors is labor. Labor makes up 2/3 of the GDP calculation. The unemployment rate is still just as low as can be, right at 4% right now. And you can see how large it got at the beginning of the pandemic, and how quickly it fell back down and got well below 4%. It seems right back at 4% again. When you look over the past 20 years, you don't see very many periods that have as low GDP as we have right now, or it has as low unemployment as we have right now, with as high a GDP exceeding even potential GDP. It just means the economy is doing very, very well. One of the struggles we had over the past several years was we had low labor force participation. There were a lot of retirements right at the time of the pandemic, and there were a lot of workers that decided to step out of the labor market entirely. It took several years for that to rebound. We're still a little bit below where we had been prior to the pandemic. And so the labor market used to be much tighter. It used to be that workers were much more willing to quit. It used to be that it was much more difficult to hire somebody into a position that you had open. Today that has relaxed somewhat. It's easier to hire workers than it was, but it's not quite as easy as it was before the pandemic. Things are still a little bit tight, and you notice that we're not quite back to trend, although it could be that this is the new normal. This may be the level that we're going to be at. That could be the level of tightness we're going to have in the labor market going forward. Maybe the biggest story over the past several years has been inflation. So this picture is fairly busy. But what I want to point out to you are that there's two different things going on. So off on the left-hand side, you can see the inflation rate. This is the percentage change for that month in the price index put into an annual rate. So during the pandemic, you see that it gets as high as 7% annualized inflation, which is fairly large. And people are very concerned about inflation because this is an increase in the general price level. This is all of the prices that we pay. This particular price index, which is the PCE, it incorporates all sorts of different things. This is not just the bundle of goods at the grocery store that one buys. It incorporates energy costs and housing costs and other things. If you look at the right-hand tail of this, if you look today at what the annualized rate of inflation, where we're at 2%. And 2% is the target that the Fed is shooting for. Now, the Fed will then say, we're there, we've arrived, inflation is solved. And I'm going to explain why they're right. But for most of us, we look at this and we say, look at the price level, and that's that kind of tannish-looking line. The price level is just simply the price index. This one is the CPIU. that price level is significantly higher than it was just at the start of the pandemic. So if we go from January 2020 till today, it's 22% higher than it was. And that indicates that on average, prices in the economy are 22% higher than they were just a few years back. If you are specifically thinking about grocery store prices, those are up 28%. Some prices go up, some prices go down. Housing has had the biggest price increase of the goods that we keep track of. If what we're hoping for is a return to prices from before the pandemic, that's not going to happen, right? Prices are not going to go back down. And I want to speak just for a little bit about why not. Why do we absolutely not want zero inflation? Why do we not want negative inflation, what we call deflation? Deflation causes serious issues. If prices were expected to go down in the future, that means that people would not buy goods today. People would be very hesitant to buy some large purchase if they thought, if I just wait a few months, the price will continue to go down. And if they always thought the price would continue to go down, that just puts a damper on all economic activity. If prices were always going down, that would mean businesses would be making less money, and it would mean that they would need to pay their workers less. Workers are very resistant to price cuts. Workers are okay with a price freeze, with a wage freeze. But if their wages are, if you go to the worker and say, I'm sorry, we've got to decrease your wage, that becomes very difficult. And employers just don't do it. And instead, they do layoffs. And when you do layoffs, you end up with all these unemployed people, and you start causing recessions. If you end up in a deflationary situation to actually get the price level to come back down, that makes things way worse. I mean, the estimate is that instead of 2% inflation, if we had 2% deflation, that would reduce annual GDP by the growth rate of annual GDP by, from where we are, which is around 2%, down to a negative 1 to negative 2%. We would definitely be in a recessionary state. The Federal Reserve then targets 2% rather than 0, and the reason they're targeting 2% is because they want some cushion. They just want to make sure that they don't end up in a deflationary situation. So prices often drop at the beginning of recessions, and they don't want to drop too far. So they always just plan on 2% inflation, so that just in case, if there is a drop, we'll be okay. So I want to talk just a little bit about public perception about what inflation has been like. In 2022, there was a survey of 1,000 adults in the US, and they asked them, they gave them a list of a whole bunch of different policies. And they asked, which of these policies do you think would increase inflation, and which of these policies do you think would decrease inflation? The most popular policies that would decrease inflation were the following in rank order. The first one was to increase domestic oil production. And people are right about that. So if you were to increase energy production, what that should do is lower the price of energy, in this case, lower the price of oil. That would in general cause prices to drop. If you had more of it, oil price goes down, general prices go down, less inflation. The next most popular was price controls. Price controls are bad. Now let me tell you why they don't fix inflation. So when you pick a few goods and you say, the price of this good has to be whatever it is, you put a price control in place. What you're doing is you're causing shortages. You're causing the demand for that good to be too high, the amount supplied is too low, and you end up having to find some way to deal with that imbalance in the market. What happens is people then demand close substitutes, and those prices go up. Price controls do not decrease inflation, they just move it around from one good to another. Okay, decrease the interest rate. That has the opposite effect. So decreasing the interest rate actually causes inflation, it doesn't reduce inflation. People were wrong about that one. A tax decrease. So cutting taxes also causes inflation. It's returning more money to people. It's not pulling money out of the system, it causes inflation. And then finally, fifth most popular was reducing aid to Ukraine. Reducing aid to Ukraine actually would decrease inflation, just probably not very much. So the amount of aid that has been sent in total to Ukraine represents a tiny fraction of the federal budget. It represents about 0.15% of GDP in a year. It represents about 0.7 of what the federal government spends in an average year. So it would have the effect of it just be tiny. 2 years later, same kind of survey. They asked 2,200 adults. These were the top 5. Price controls is still at the top. This is wrong. Tax increase is the right answer. So if you increase taxes, that would cause inflation to come down. You could decrease interest rates. That's the same wrong answer from before. Increase tariffs. Increased tariffs do not reduce inflation. They cause prices to go up. Only on certain goods, but it's not causing other prices to go down. You're putting a tax on goods coming to the US that raises prices. Okay, then last, increase antitrust regulation. That potentially could reduce inflation if the cause is that there's anti-competitive behavior going on. Okay, so what's the point of showing you that the public has kind of a 2 out of 5 view of inflation, that on average people aren't getting this right? The reason I wanted to bring it up is because in Indiana, we're getting rid of economics education in our state. This is not unusual. Not very many states have economics education for high school students. So the current diploma, 440 diploma, requires 1 credit of economics. The new credit instead is, for the new diploma instead is going to require 1 credit of personal finance, which is a related but not the same kind of topic. What's being cut and will not be in the new course are the concepts of scarcity and economic reasoning. This is incentives, trade-offs, opportunity costs, supply and demand, setting prices, elasticity, price controls, market structures, corporations, profit maximization, monopoly, the role of government, including things like public goods, externalities, taxes, budget deficits, national economic performance and the measurement of the national economy, including things like business cycles and inflation, money and the role of financial institutions, including the Federal Reserve, interest rates, the financial sector, economic stabilization, fiscal policy, monetary policy, national debt, and then finally, international trade, including comparative advantages of trade barriers. This is what used to be in the curriculum for high school students, and that if and when these new curriculum requirements go in place, these would all be removed. Instead, Indiana would offer a personal finance course. This course would be required, and it covers things like financial responsibility and decision-making, relating income and careers, managing and planning for money, managing credit and debt, risk management and insurance, and saving and saving and investing. It's going to be more of a math class with lots of examples, and the math teachers will help them work through these examples. 21 states currently require economics in high school. 9 states make it part of their state testing. Indiana does not make it part of the state testing. When this change happens, then there'll just be 20 states, although there are some others that are thinking of cutting it. Right now, 9 states require a personal finance class. 4 have it as part of their state testing. So that's just to let you know where it is. My take, and this is the end of the presentation for me, is that however we do it, I just think voters need to understand economics. These are the kinds of issues that make a big difference in the economy. And there are a lot of unintended consequences of government action. So for example, I think in the surveys when people are so quick to say, we need tax cuts, that's the right answer, or we need stimulus checks, that's the right answer. You have to understand that there are these unintended consequences of doing those actions. Another example is canceling student debt. Canceling student debt has all of these positive benefits, but there's also a lot of unintended consequences from canceling student debt. Imposing tariffs on China. There's good reasons to do that, but there's also unintended consequences from doing that. And so we want people to understand the trade-offs and to realize that it's not as if, oh, if only the government would do this, that would fix the problems. It's that for every government action, there's the intended consequence and then there's the unintended consequence. So I just want to conclude by giving you one very recent example of an unintended consequence. I just thought this was so interesting. Back in 2004, the federal government started all of the allergen labeling on boxes, right? So like you buy your cereal box or your food package, and they'll say at the bottom, contains, and they mandated 8 different things that were the most common allergens in our society. This was like milk, eggs, fish, wheat, nuts, other things. Okay, in 2023, the FDA then required we add one more to the list. They want to add sesame to the list. So sesame it affects a smaller number of people, but my understanding is it can be a very severe allergy. They want to make sure that people have information about it on the package so they know if it's in there. Which seems like a very reasonable thing to do. In addition, though, there's a bunch of requirements in place about cross-contamination. If you have any sesame anywhere in the establishment, then you have to make sure that it doesn't touch any of the other machines that any of the other food is on. Unless it's on the ingredient list. So if you have it as an ingredient in the food, then cross-contamination doesn't matter. So the response for food manufacturers and restaurants has been in the last year to add sesame to almost everything that we buy at the store. Rather than, when there were 8 all at once, they made the changes. They had different lines. They set up one for the rice checks and a different one for the wheat checks. But now that it's just this one thing, sesame, and it seems like it doesn't affect very many people, if you go to Olive Garden or Chick-fil-A or Wendy's, you'll see that in the last year, sesame has been added as an ingredient to many of the products, and it wasn't previously there. And that's simply an unintended consequence. It's not what the government wanted to happen. It happens because anytime you mandate something, you often get something else. Okay, so that's the kind of thing I want students to learn about in economics courses. And I'm very hopeful that whether or not the 440 diploma changes and then this change happens in high school, I just hope that we try to educate students about these trade-offs somewhere. We could do it in grade 7 and 8, that's fine. You could do it as a sort of STEM elective course along the way. But whatever it is, I just want people to know. It could be that the right answer is saying, let's not let the voters decide, let's just turn it over to some experts and let the experts decide on the policy. But I don't like that answer. I like the answer where we let everybody have the information, we try to teach it. I just believe in education. And I think the more that we make this stuff available to people, the better outcomes we'll have as a country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. Now back to my childhood days with Monty Python for something completely different. We're going to bring up Jillian Carr. Jillian is an associate professor of economics in the Michigan School of Business. Her current research is on the economics of crime, poverty, law, and economics. She has spent the last few years thinking about income assistance program implementation and how it impacts the lives of recipients and how the current U.S. legal system serves different groups. Would you please welcome Professor Jillian Carr.
Thank you, and I might seem young, but I was going to make that same joke about Monty Python. So this is going to feel very different, actually. So as you said, my name is Jillian Carr, and I'm what we call ourselves the field of crime economists. And so the first thing I'm going to aim to do today is to convince you that we should think about crime when we think about the economy. So we have a couple of reasons that I'm going to start with. And the first is the fact that crime responds to economic conditions and policy. In my own work, this is most of what I'm thinking about in terms of how various policies are impacting crime. So you might recognize this man up here. This is Jean Valjean from Les Mis, right? And if you've been familiar with this in the past, this character goes to prison for stealing bread for his hungry family, right? You can imagine that people are committing crimes because they have basic needs in this type of way. So this is one example of why we might think about crime as something that responds to the economy. We think about the economy getting bad, we might think about property crime increasing. So when we think about this particular type of property crime in this way, we think that it can represent the sources of the economy. In fact, if you were to include illegal activity in GDP, it would actually be 1% higher than it is. So that's interesting to note the scale of that in our economy. And when we think about your resources that you have for your work or for your production in various ways, as potentially providing you with sort of the spoils of your labor, property crime represents a distortion within this space. And then lastly, we can think about this as an alternative to the formal labor market, right? We're all here, we're at a Chamber of Commerce event, right? We obviously appreciate the formal labor market, but there are going to be folks like the Hamburglar who might commit themselves to a life of crime instead of participating in what we refer to as the formal labor market. So hopefully I convinced you that we should be thinking about these issues. And what I'm going to present to you today is going to be coming from the FBI's National Incident-Based Reporting System. I have no idea why these slides are advancing on their own. Please forgive me for that. So these data are coming from the FBI. As I said, they are agency reported and they are incident level. So this is really exciting to me as somebody who likes to work with crime data, but it's also something that could be exciting to all of you, to my students, high school students maybe taking economics classes, because it allows you to go through and take a look at the data for yourself. These are a really neat data set because they're incident level, and then every single crime that gets committed here in Tippecanoe County, one of our agencies is going to be responsible for putting together a data set that then goes to the FBI with details about that crime. So it's actually on the level of the crime that gets reported. As I said, these are available online, which is very exciting. And this transition to this data from the older system really got underway in 2021. Things were going on in 2020 related to this transition as well, but you can understand how everyone was very busy that year. So if you're going to ever look at this data for yourself, be very careful around that time period because things change and many more agencies have come online in recent years. So to walk you briefly through the type of crime that we have here in Tippecanoe County in 2023. So what I put together here are data from the Tippecanoe County Sheriff's Office, the Lafayette PD, West Lafayette PD, and the Purdue PD. So all of these three together here are aggregated, and you'll notice that the largest percentage of our crime in our community are going to be categorized as a property crime. Unsurprisingly, most of these are in the sort of larceny theft category. This hopefully should surprise any of us. With fraud coming in second most common, this includes things like writing a worthless check, for example. So many of these are rather minor, but they're going to be still in this fraud space. The second largest category is crime against persons, and the bulk of those are coming from assaults. It's worth keeping in mind that assault is quite varied. This goes from everything from a fist fight to a non-fatal shooting. So this is a very, very large category. The third is crimes against society, and the greatest category here is also potentially unsurprisingly drug crimes. So, I want to bring up something really interesting here, which is monthly trends across the east versus west side of our community. So on the top, I've aggregated West Lafayette and Purdue together, and on the bottom, I have just Lafayette. So you can think about this as east versus west side, leaving out the Sheriff's Office data for the obvious reason that they cover both. So what you notice is that in both communities early in the year, crime is lower than it is later. During the summer, it is higher in Lafayette, lower in West Lafayette and on Purdue campus, and then it peaks on the west side in August and September, whereas by that point in Lafayette, things have already sort of cooled down into the fall. So I think there are two important lessons here. The first is that community patterns matter, right? We think about the economic activity on Purdue's campus, the human activity on Purdue's campus, and it's concentrated in the fall. That's students arriving, that's movement, that's football season, right? We have a lot of people visiting our community during that time as well. So keeping that in mind, short-run comparisons can be very misleading if we're not careful. We can imagine a headline that says, look what's going on this fall in West Lafayette. Crime is through the roof and it's dropping in Lafayette. And that would be really misleading, right? If we looked at this full time series, we wouldn't think that that's actually the case. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is to compare us briefly to our friends in Bloomington. So as I said, every agency has the responsibility to collect data and report it to the FBI, including the IU police, just like the Purdue police. So you can take a look at this and you'll notice that only on theft are we having more crime than IU over on the Purdue campus. Maybe we feel pretty good about that. But the important lesson I want to draw here is that population matters. IU has about 5,000 more people covered by their police department. So as soon as we reduce this to actually look at how many people are on each campus, you'll notice that our results on theft was a little bit worse than it did before. But in most other categories, things look a little bit more similar. In fact, in terms of drug crimes, we come right even with IU. The second thing I want to note is that reporting varies. At the very beginning, I said, every agency is going to be looking at all the crimes that occur there, putting together a report and sending it to the FBI. And that first step is really important. How crime gets reported is super key for how it ends up in our statistics. And I was really, surprised at first to see how many more sex offenses occur on IU's campus than Purdue's campus. And then I remembered a recent trip I took to IU, and I remembered that in every single bathroom stall in the women's room, there's a sign that explains how to report sexual assault. This is not something I've seen at Purdue. And if I didn't know that there was a sort of public action campaign on their campus to increase reporting, I might have thought, wow, what is going on at IU? When it really has more to do with their reporting processes. So this is always something to keep in mind, that anytime we change people's behavior about reporting crime, we might also find that it looks like crime goes up. So we shouldn't be super surprised by that. So I will end things there with a sort of interesting, I hope, note about how crime looks in our community and also down in Bloomington. And if you have further questions, feel free to contact me at my Purdue email address. Thank you.
Everybody's hanging in there. I don't have a death slide to start with. That's a good intro. My name is Travis Montoya. I'm the plant manager at the Premium plant here in Lafayette. Anybody know who Premium is? That's a lot better than we did 3 years ago. Who can pronounce Premium? Yeah, we're like 90% on that. So we're really excited people can at least know who we are. So just going to talk a little bit about who we are and help you get to know Premium a little bit more. And then I'll invite one of my colleagues up to talk about our economic outlook. So Premium, we're one of the oldest companies in town that y'all haven't really heard of. We used to be known by A. Staley back in the late 70s. We had a couple generations being known as Tate & Lyle. And then about 3 years ago, we spun off onto our own privately owned company and rebranded ourselves as Premium. Heavy focus in the Midwest. We have a lot of manufacturing sites across Indiana, Illinois, Tennessee, and then we've got some more global sites in South America and a joint venture down in Mexico. What do we do? What's our purpose? We're really about using the great ag products in the Midwest, using our know-how and turning those into real ingredients that we can all use and consume in our day-to-day lives. This is a little bit about our purpose and what drives us, but what do we make? What do we really make? Hopefully everybody has come in contact with some of our products even this morning. We make everything from food ingredient products. Hopefully anybody had a sweetened beverage today, maybe a Coke, Pepsi. Need a lot more hands up on this one. If you've had a sweetened beverage, it's probably been sweetened with our products sometime in the recent past. We also make pet food products, so if you fed your dog or cat this morning, might have some of our ingredients in that. You can kind of just see we touch everywhere in your household, everywhere in your day-to-day life, but you won't see us on the shelves. You won't see us at the supermarket. But we're that awesome ingredient that's inside of everything that you need to keep your life moving. So that's enough about us. How how are we really doing? I'd like to introduce Tim Fowler. He's our General Manager of Sweeteners and Acidulants. Tim's been in the industry over 25 years, been with Permeates for 10. Past experience with PepsiCo. Tim really drives our business in the sweeteners and as well as some of our growth markets around the bioeconomy. And Tim's going to give us a little bit of how are we doing and what's the future hold for Premium.
Thanks, Travis, for that nice introduction. Any vets in the audience? Any vets? Thank you for your service, sir. I know I'm a day late. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for letting us come today and share a little bit more about Permeate, the most committed, most reliable, and most sustainable in the industry. A little bit about our outlook on the future and why we think Permeate, as well as manufacturing, especially bio-manufacturing here in the Midwest, including right here in Lafayette, are well positioned to win in that future going forward. The future, indeed, is very bright. For those of you who noticed on Travis's one slide, we do have a grain elevator where we store, grain that's been harvested in Fowler, Indiana. No relation. Just in case you think, I own part of the company. I just learned it. So excited to talk about a couple of things as we think about the next 10 minutes of our time. How's our current performance doing? What's our near-term outlook? And by that, I really mean really the next year. And then longer term, what's our outlook for where this business is going, where the economy is going, and how that actually impacts lives right here in Lafayette. So from a current performance perspective, I don't have a full slide on that, but we're doing well, right? We're doing well on two fronts, both safety and our economic performance. That Permeate safety there's no higher priority for us than safety. We make a commitment to all of our employees to show up in the morning. It's our obligation to make sure they go home at night in just as good a shape as they showed up. So that is the top thing that our executive team looks at every month, is how are we doing against our safety record. I'm happy to report that we recently celebrated 2 years of injury-free right here in Lafayette. And we just completed a safe utility shutdown and restart. Those are some of the most dangerous times in our business when you're shutting down a massive facility like we have out on the south end of Cinnamon, restarting it all back up, injury-free. So congratulations to Travis and his team for leading 2 years of injury-free at that site. That's fantastic results. From an economics perspective, this year our volumes are up 9% versus last year. One of our values is growth, so up 9% is really good. That's a sign that there's good demand for all those products that Travis was showing on the screen or in everyday life, right? And we're ahead of our profit objective by about 5%. With all of our product lines. Iodine sweeteners and acidulants, so think citric acid, malic acid, fumaric acid, for those of you that don't know. So those, as well as our industrial starches. So I lead 2 of those product lines. I have here that leads the 3rd. All 3 of those product lines are growing. That's really good for our business, good for the economy. So there's robust demand for all of those things, in spite of the inflation that Kevin talked about earlier. So why is that good? That Permeate is seeing that kind of growth, right? It has enabled us to make significant investments in our facilities, right? We have made significant investments here in Lafayette. We also have our plant, as Travis noted, in Decatur, Illinois, Loudon, Tennessee, Dayton, Ohio, and Duluth, Minnesota. All of those operations, we are taking that growth and we're investing it back into those businesses so we can continue that cycle of positive growth. Right? We take our responsibility to all of our stakeholders, both our customers, the farmers who grow the corn, right, and our employees, as I talked about earlier, to name a few, very seriously. And when we do well, we make sure we invest back into those facilities so we can continue to have a long-term, viable, and reliable So looking ahead to next year, the near-term outlook remains very positive, right? Crops are good, meaning they're growing, very well, and other major inputs are flat to declining, so that's a good sign for us from a cost control perspective. Volume demand, as I talked about 9% this year, that volume demand across all of our product lines remains stable, and the industry overall, amongst all the competitors, the capacity in that space is very tight. So I am not an economics professor, but I understand that when supply and demand are in balance, that's actually good. It keeps things very stable, somewhat predictable. You don't want massive volatility. So volume demand overall is stable, and we're forecasting a bit of growth on our volumes headed into next year. And that means that we can probably, as we see some costs rising, we can pass those on, and we can get a little bit of pricing. Right now, it's significant pricing, not like 22% that you showed, but minimal pricing. That's a very healthy market that we're competing in, right? As we look at the supply side and the commodities markets, specifically sugar and corn, two massive inputs for us, it's critical for us to understand what the farmers are seeing, right? What are the growing conditions? What's the size of the crop? What's the quality of the crop, right? Because that factors both the availability that they have to give to us, but then also the costs that we're going to have to pay, and ultimately, the money that they pay. The domestic sugar crop harvest, both beet and cane sugar, is progressing a bit ahead of schedule, and the costs in that, mostly in Michigan and other places like that, they're flat, slightly down, so in stable place, right? The global sugar crop, which is more important for us given we have operations outside the US, is predicted to be strong overall, with strengths in Brazil offsetting weakness in Asia. As a global company, we need to pay attention to stuff that happens both locally, but also all the way around the world. And so global sugar costs are down now 15% off their highs from a couple of years ago. So that's actually good. So we saw that massive inflation. It made it very difficult. As a company, we then need to pass that on. Then our customers pass that on to consumers, and that drives the price up. So stable prices, and even though it's not coming down overall, there are pockets where we're actually seeing some costs reducing. And one of those most notably is in sugar. The corn harvest, right here, progressing faster than usual, with good quality, and costs also trending down. So I looked, for those of you who know, corn futures trade on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. I looked this morning. It costs you $4.30 a bushel. Not that you need to memorize that in order to buy corn from farmers. And that is also down about 10% from a year ago. So that has a good and a bad, right? Speaking of unintended consequences. So I don't judge that. I'm just telling you the facts of where they're at. And that's where corn's at today. So costs, broadly speaking, on our business in the economy and things that we really care about, they're stable. They're in good position, slight downward pressure, right? From a demand perspective, a lot of our business, as Travis mentioned, goes into food. We do have some other businesses, but we're highly food-driven business, and that's pretty consistent regardless of the economy, right? So lots of things, houses change, right? You may not buy a house, you may not buy some other big ticket item, but by and large, people eat every day, regardless of whether or not the economy is good or the economy is bad. So that generally is pretty stable. However, as a market-centric company, for us to really know what's happening, we follow the public results of our customers. Pepsi, Coke, Travis, thanks for the plug. You need to buy, I don't know why there wasn't any, here today, but maybe we'll solve that for the future. You can sponsor the drink, portion of the lunch. Coke's volume this year, globally, is up 2%. So that's actually pretty good. Stable, not up, not down. Right? In North America, it's flat. PepsiCo, their Q3 North America beverage volume was down 3%. But really importantly, when they came to us to contract for next year, they asked for flat volumes. So, that side of the business, while CSDs, carbonated soft drinks, are relatively flat, that's actually a really good sign. Because if you went back 10 years ago, people were predicting the demise of the carbonated soft drink. It has basically been flat for 10 years, up and down a little bit here and there, but basically flat. Turns out people actually like to have soft drink every now and again. On the converse, in some categories, gummies use a lot of corn syrup and a lot of acids, and they are growing rapidly. I don't know, and I'm not just talking about the ones that have become legal recently, we're talking about all gummies, right? So Ferrara, candy company, one of the largest candy companies in the US, big maker of gummies. There's some Alani's right here on I-65. Haribo, new into Wisconsin, massive new plant. Almost every candy you walk in a convenience store that used to be one type is now available in a gummy. Like I would have never thought I would have seen the day that Lifesavers was a gummy. Weren't they a mint? You know, that doesn't make any sense to me. But in May, the Ferrara Candy Company reported 15% growth in their net sales year on year, with their Nerds candy growing 67% year on year. And their gummy clusters are the top American candy. Gummy clusters, you know, in Nerds, America's top candy. So that probably is different, you know, than when at least I was young, right? In addition to our customers, we also follow general economic indicators like inflation, like Kevin talked about, its impact on consumer spending. We track housing starts and mortgage rates, because the more you have to put into that very large part of your life, the less you have to spend on other things. Also, housing starts, little known fact, some of our products go into insulation and drywall. So if you're not building a new house, if you're not renovating your house, that's an impact. A new corn could actually do that. Well, okay. We also track consumer attitudes towards the ingredients that we make, like high fructose corn syrup, and industry-wide sales data through the Corn Refiners Association to understand both industry trends, but also validate our performance in the industry. And good news for those of you who are here in Lafayette and want to make sure that that plant in Lafayette continues to succeed. So some of our products are also more global, the acidulants and the dry dextrose. So we do track import trends, volumes and prices, as well as freight rates, just to make sure we're competitive. But from your perspective, you probably care more about what's happening, right here locally. So a few key points on the short-term outlook, right? Costs are favorable, supply capacity is tight, and our overall demand for the corn-based sweeteners that we make, here in Lafayette is stable, right? Demand for the industrial starches and our acids is growing a little bit. So, by and large, good there. Also good, the demise of high fructose corn syrup, way overstated. So as we think about the future, that's a good base. So that is a lot of what we make. It keeps the plant running, keeps lots of people employed, 1,800 that Travis mentioned. So that's really good to have a stable base load in that. It's actually growing in Mexico in the last 5 years, which has been a bit of a surprise. Finally, the rise of the bioeconomy and precision fermentation that actually needs these sugar feedstocks in order to fuel their fermentation processes is just ramping up. It's just getting started. You may have heard some things in the news about this, but I would tell you we're just on the verge of that starting. And so biomanufacturing and how we pivot into that is what's going to keep us in good shape and create a very competitive market for what we make in our corn mills. But more on that in a second. So, as any good, large-scale industrial manufacturer that employs 1,800 people and has massive assets, we don't just look at the next year. If I'm only looking at next year to figure out where to go, this is an ocean liner. It doesn't turn like a speedboat, right? So we are looking well into the future so that we can make sure that we are, still an integral part of the communities, where we work. Our purpose and vision, as Travis shared, as well as our demonstrated recent performance and our continued investments, make us feel like we've got this in the right place. But let me talk to you a little bit more about how we as a sustainable business think about it, understand where the market is going, and most importantly, understand what our customers want. If you want your business to succeed over the long term, you better be satisfying what the market needs and what your customers want. So we recently issued a voice of customer research to make it, and what they came back with makes it very clear what they want, right? They want Security of supply, right, which means they get what we make on time and in full every single time. In our business, we call that perfectly executed orders. Right now, we're running at about 98%. That's good, but not, we still got a couple points to improve there. They also want quality, right? If this is a product that's going to go into your body, you need to be assured that that's of the utmost quality. It's unquestionable. Those first two are pretty universal across all of our customer base, and actually significantly increased in their importance during COVID. Global supply chains went crazy, people got nervous about lots of different things. Those things actually became more as important as price in our customer negotiations over the last few years. The third one, sustainability, is becoming increasingly important. It's not at the same level as the other two. And how important it is really is customer specific. So what does that mean? Well, lots of smaller customers are still struggling with how to deal with this, but our very biggest customers, the Pepsis, the Cokes, the Nestle's, right? And the ones who are leaders in the industry are going to set where the industry goes. They're already making claims, right? They're making public commitments around meaningful reductions in the carbon emissions of their supply chain. Scope 1 and 2, for those who really need to sort of what they're doing within their four walls. Scope 3 is stuff that their suppliers and their other partners do. So the boldest ones are actually making commitments about what they control and what they expect their suppliers and partners to actually do. And for many of our customers, that's where we sit in the Scope 3. We also have our own Scope 1 and 2 to deal with, right? But some of them are even making commitments, see in the bottom right there, net zero carbon emissions. Net zero. That's a massive commitment that they're making publicly. So, for those customers, it's really, really important. So how do we then take this at Primient? Well, at Primient, as you can read, sustainability is built into what we do every step of the value chain. We are literally rooted in sustainability, right? We've been on this sustainability journey for many years. We didn't just get here overnight, and we are clearly the industry leader in this space. If you look on the far right, we use every part of the kernel. We take in that corn, we break it down, literally every part of that kernel of corn goes into something, which is how we make such a broad array of products that Travis was talking about, right? If you look to the far left, we enroll 100% of all the corn acres we buy in a sustainable agriculture program, which is working with farmers to help them be sustainable farmers. What does sustainable farming mean? It is about the environment, but it's also about their business and making sure the decisions they make on their farm are actually going to make them viable as farmers over the long term. So we have a partnership with a company called Tritera, who has tools that help the farmers decide, is this decision that I'm making going to be good for the earth as well as my bottom line or not? That's sustainable farming. It's a much broader definition than just it's good for the environment. Because if they're not successful over the long term, all the things we rely on them for, won't exist. That's a big problem. Food is kind of important, right? Primient also grinds the corn at our U.S. plants using natural gas. Gas-powered cogeneration technology, which is a massive advantage in terms of driving energy efficiency. So we are the first corn wet miller in the United States to move entirely away from coal. That's a big move. It took a lot of investments, right? We're also proud to have two of the lowest carbon emitting and most energy efficient wet mills in the U.S., one of which is right here in Lafayette. So we should be proud of that, what we've done here. In fact, our carbon emissions are half the industry average. Half. And it's because, as I said before, we've been on this journey for a long time. We've made a lot of investments, so that's how we're able to do that. The combination of all that I showed on the last page and this, puts us in that position, right? And we're continuing to invest. So, if sustainability is only important to some customers, why are we making all these investments to be a leader in this space? It's because if you think about where we're trying to go and being great stewards of the for all of our stakeholders in the communities in which we work, we have to stay ahead of the trends. And the future growth in this industry is all about the bioeconomy. What is the bioeconomy? Put simply, it's about making things from renewable resources like corn instead of from non-renewable resources like petrochemicals. And corn can do that, right? It's driving an increased need in the feedstock that we produce out of our plants. And by its nature, the bioeconomy is anchored in sustainability, which makes it even more important in the years ahead. Why are we confident that the bioeconomy will deliver positive economic impact, both for us as a company at Primient, but also for Lafayette? Well, the proof is now public. You may have seen back in early September, we announced a partnership with a company called Sustainia. Sustainia, as you might gather by its name, sustainability was very important to them as they made a choice of where they were going to locate their plant. What Sustainia does is instead of using oil and a petrochemical process to get to half of what's in those plastic bottles that you have, they start from corn. And they convert that into what's called bio-monoethylene glycol. You don't need to know what that means, but it's half of what's in that bottle. So instead of using oil, non-renewable resource, in order to make that plastic bottle, we're now have bioplastics that are going to create that will ultimately make that bottle. Right? Together we're investing nearly $400 million here in Lafayette in order to erect this facility. It'll be on our campus in South Lafayette on the land that Primient currently owns, and we will supply the feedstock that they need in order to run this plant. So really exciting, for the city, for us as a company, and as a move into the bioeconomy, right? Why did they choose here? Well, obviously our industry-leading, emissions standard was a clear reason why they did. Also, the geography and the support in this region that's capable of helping push them to actually net zero, given the surroundings here, was key. Access to talent, having a world-class university as neighbors where they can draw talent to continue to work on next-generation technology was a huge positive. A central location with strong logistics and transportation networks to get they're a global company, right? So they're going to move their product all over. That was important to them. And having a city and a state that were supportive and created a business-favorable environment was also essential. So actually, thanks to the Greater Lafayette Commerce, especially Paul Moses. I saw you, Paul. Where are you? There you are. Thank you, Paul. Great, huge advocate for this region and helping us actually communicate with our potential partner why they should come here. So thank you for that, as well as to Mayor Tony Roswarski for all the support and commitment to growing manufacturing, right here in Lafayette. So thank you. That's all. So in closing, the near-term outlook for us is very positive, and the future is bright and sustainable. Right? For Primient, it's critical that we continue to serve the Pepsis, the Cokes, the Kraft Heinz, and make a pivot into the enormous opportunity that is the bioeconomy. With over 100 years of demonstrated experience in driving agricultural innovation and manufacturing excellence, as well as our commitment to the communities in which we work, we have the capability to do that. But we're not resting there. We're making further investments. We're pushing, even deeper into these areas, right? Including here in Lafayette, to ensure that we are successful for the long term. And make no mistake, once developed, the bioeconomy will reduce dependence on fossil fuels. It will create sustainable jobs. It will make a more resilient supply chain. It will revitalize U.S. manufacturing, especially manufacturing right here in the Midwest. It will have a positive impact on the global cause to get to a net zero economy. It will make the world a more sustainable environment, and it will actually just improve human health when we accomplish all that. So, I think that's good for Primient. I think that's good for Lafayette. I think that's good for Indiana, and I think, frankly, it's good for humankind. And that's what we call power with purpose. Thank you.